Welcome to Series 2, Episode 9 of the In Her Financial Shoes podcast. Welcome to the In Her Financial Shoes podcast with me, Catherine Morgan, founder of The Money Panel, helping you to get financially naked. Listen in each week where we talk about that taboo subject of money. Listen to brutally real-life stories, step into our guest shoes and be left feeling 100% confident and in control. Oh, and we hate financial jargon, so don't expect any here. Small steps, big wins, let's go. Hello, and welcome to the In Her Financial Shoes podcast. So we're really getting into this investing series now. So we're on episode 9 now of series 2. And one of the common threads, I guess, that's coming up in every single episode that I've been recording for you is around this topic of behavioural finance and how our behaviours influence how we achieve our financial goals and our financial intentions around money. And I've been really fascinated by exploring this topic myself for the last sort of 2 years or so. I spoke at a conference last year that was run by a fellow financial planner called Andy Hart. And his conference was called Humans Under Management. And Andy's a massive believer in, our job as a financial planner and certainly my job as a financial coach is to help you to achieve financial success by helping you to manage your behaviours around money. And if you're not already listening to Andy's podcast, it's another great one to add to your subscribe list. It's called the Maven Advisor. And, a lot of what Andy talks about is about kind of nudging people in the right direction to make sure that you stay on track with your financial behaviours and your financial habits. So on today's show, we have a guest, Daniel Crosby, Dr. Daniel Crosby, who is a psychologist and a behavioural finance expert who helps organisations to really kind of understand the mind and the financial markets. And in the book that I've read that he has written, he talks about the laws of wealth. So the book's kind of split into 2 sections. And the first one is talking about his 10 laws or 10 rules of wealth. And then the second part is kind of goes into the investment management side. So that was Daniel's second book. His first book was called Personal Benchmark, Integrating Behavioural Finance and Investment Management. And he's also just published his latest work, The Behavioural Investor, which is a look at the kind of neurology, that's the right word, neurology, psychology and physiology. Oh gosh, that's tough. I think I need some caffeine to say that again, around how we make financial decisions. But he's a super nice guy. He's married with 3 children. We actually explore some of his own relationships with money growing up as a child and how his father was actually a financial advisor. So he grew up in a household where they did talk about money and his dad used to encourage him to invest in the stock market. And I love actually one of my favorite things is when he talks about how he teaches his 3 kids about how to invest. And his 9-year-old daughter, his eldest daughter, she loves Disney. So she invests in Disney shares. Like, how cool is that? So, we do sort of talk about children and how we can teach kids about money. We talk about his relationship growing up around money. And then we kind of dive into some of the human behaviours, why sometimes we're silly with money, what emotions influence our financial decisions. So it's a really, really super interesting episode, this one. I hope you enjoy it. And without further ado, I welcome to the podcast, Dr. Daniel Crosby. Okay, so it's my pleasure to welcome Daniel to the podcast today. Hi, Daniel. Where are you talking to us from today?
I am coming to you from sunny Atlanta, Georgia. It's great to be here.
Oh, wow. Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. So it is also sunny here in Milton Keynes, but probably not as nice as where you're talking from.
Well, it's probably not as hot. I could almost guarantee you that.
Oh, how hot is it over there right now?
It's going to be in the mid 90s today, and I'm dreadful at making the temperature conversion. So my apologies, but very hot, very hot.
Nice. We've been quite lucky in the UK. We had a really nice bank holiday over at Easter. We had really great weather, and then it kind of went all rainy on us again. And then the sun is kind of appearing again this week. So all being well, we're up for a good summer this year.
Perfect.
Send some of your sunshine this way.
We'll do it.
So thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm a little bit nervous, I must admit, about interviewing you today, because having read one of your books, and every time I speak to people about book recommendations, yours comes up frequently. And so, really honoured to have you on the show today. So maybe you could start, Daniel, by just telling us a little bit more about yourself and kind of how you became fascinated in the world of sort of behavioural finance.
Yeah, so I am the Chief Behavioural Officer at Brinker Capital, which is an asset manager based outside of Philadelphia. So that's probably not a title that a lot of people have heard of, but basically my job is to design training, tools, and technology for investors that help them make better decisions with their money.
That's such a great title,
right?
Chief Behaviour.
Yeah. No, I always have the coolest job at a cocktail party. Very consistently, I have the coolest job title. So,
when you say that to people, are they like, oh my gosh, are you going to start analysing how I'm behaving?
Well, it's better than telling people you're a psychologist, because then they really do worry. So, I mean, that is true of me as well. But if you tell people you're a psychologist, they either get worried and want to run away, or else they want free therapy and to talk your ear off. So there's no good answer telling people you're a psychologist. My job it's in this field of behavioral finance, which is sort of the intersection of psychology and financial decision making. So really just everything I do, whether it's writing books or designing technology, is around it, helping investors make better choices with their money.
And how did you go from studying psychology into like the finance space? Where was the link for you there?
Well, I grew up the son of a financial advisor. So my dad was and is a financial advisor. And so I grew up in this sort of odd home. I mean, at least in America, and I think this is probably true broadly, we don't talk about money much. Like, it's sort of taboo. But I grew up in a very different household where we're discussing, stocks at the dinner table, and my dad is helping me invest from a very, very young age. And so that was always a love of mine. But in college, I fell in love with psychology too. And, long story short, I was looking for a way to combine these two worlds, and set out initially to be a therapist. And indeed, my doctoral degree is in clinical psychology, but set out to be a therapist, but found after about 3 years of doing therapy full time that basically I couldn't cut it. It was too heavy for me. I was worried about my clients all the time. I was bringing their problems home with me. I couldn't sleep. My wife would want to go out on a weekend, and I would, like, how can we go have fun when there's so much, sadness in the world kind of thing. And so I needed to look for a non-clinical application of psychology, and arrived, I think because of the influence of my dad early on, arrived at looking to combine these two sort of loves of mine.
Well, and that's even just in itself is a really interesting point. Like, so, because money is still so taboo, isn't it? Like, we'd rather talk about sex than talk about money. And I think, like, I grew up in a similar like environment. Like, my parents my dad talked about money, but not in the practical aspect. Like, he talked about it about business. So he was building his businesses from when I was very little. So we always kind of were around. He used to work from home. So we'd always talk about money. We'd always like practice numbers in the bath and stuff like that, always be talking about money, but not in the kind of practical sense. And I think that did have an impact on me and my ability to think about money at sort of growing up. But what impact did that have for you then? So with money being quite taboo, but with your dad being a financial advisor and talking about money with you growing up, how did he talk to you about money? What kind of things did he say?
Well, it's interesting because, he taught me these lessons, but I think, as is often the case with the lessons you learn from your parents, you don't realize how perhaps deeply they've taken root until you get into adulthood and you find yourself in some situations. But, one thing, my dad paid off our house when he was like 35 years old, which is,
Wow.
incredibly young. And the way that he did that is by us never taking family vacations and, eating beans every night. I mean, he was so singularly focused on getting out of debt that we just, it just wasn't much fun in the Crosby household for those early years when he was paying off the house. But I saw how singular his focus was, how all consuming it was. And, I remember my dad is I grew up in a conservative religious household. My dad's a very devout person, and I've never heard him swear. And he said that debt was another 4-letter word. Like in his mind, debt was, just as bad as the rest of the 4-letter words. And people don't believe me, we were not allowed to say the word debt in our home because he hated it that much. So, seeing that was I think formative and influenced me going forward. But he was also a big investor. I mean, he was very interested in the stock market. I think I learned good lessons early on about taking appropriate risks and risk management, and how owning stocks was just really owning part of a business. And we would talk, he would say, I'm a big baseball fan. And he would say, look, back at that time, the Chicago Tribune newspaper owns the Cubs. And so like if you own this stock, you own part of a baseball team, and that was incredible to me that I could be, part owner of a baseball team at 10 years old.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, lots of good lessons.
Really exciting, Ray, right? So talking about the stock market in an exciting way, that you can have a share of a company that maybe you love, or, and actually I was talking about this on, I did a podcast interview this morning with a lady who writes about ethical and sustainable investing and how, we can give back to the world through investing. And I think it's really important for a lot of people to think about it in that way, because actually by investing in the stock market, it seems like really scary. The word stock market, I think, is really super scary for a lot of people. It's actually, if you think about it in that language about owning a stock in a company, that's exciting, isn't it?
Well, I think it's become too much of a video game, right? Like we just kind of watch the red and the green and the up and down, and people have become divorced from what it truly is, which is partial ownership of a business. And so when you think, wow, I can own part of a business and I can vote my shares in a way that impacts the way this business goes forward. And I can make the world a better place, through socially responsible investing and wanting to, by being partial owner of this business and voting my shares and acting in a way such that I bring about the world that I want to. I mean, this is a bit of a cynical opinion and perhaps not a very popular one, but your dollars, your dollars vote a lot more strongly than your actual vote does. I mean, the way you vote with your dollars counts for a lot more than how you vote at the ballot, even though both are important. So, if you want to bring about this kind of just world that you dream of, there's hardly a better way than being thoughtful about how you spend your money.
Yeah, I love that. So how does that influence then how you teach your daughter about money?
So I have 3 kids. I have 2 daughters.
You have 3? Oh, sorry. Yeah. I thought you had 1.
No. I have 3. I have a 9-year-old daughter, a 5-year-old son, and a 2-year-old daughter. So
amazing.
So what's exciting for me is I struggle a bit because I don't know what kind of world my kids will be working in, just with the way that, AI and automation and other things are going. I don't quite know what to prepare my kids for, but I know that whatever the world looks like when they're grown-ups, I know that there will be a heavy dose of creativity and entrepreneurial spirit. So I'm, in particular, my daughter, the eldest, who's, the one who's can get some of this stuff. I'm teaching her to be entrepreneurial. I'm teaching her to be self-starting and creative, because I don't think, those are skills that aren't going anywhere. And I think they're going to be increasingly in demand in our world. But I absolutely talk to her and the other kids about this. I help them pick out stocks. She's a proud Disney shareholder. Disney's been on fire lately, and but you have to talk to them too about you want to own Nike and Disney and companies they invest in, but you have to say too, liking a company doesn't necessarily make it a good investment. And so we've used their interest in those companies as a teaching vehicle to learn more about how to analyze a stock.
Oh, I love that. That's such a great thing. Gosh, I'm just thinking about my boys. I've got two boys that are 5 and 8. Mm-hmm. So I'm just thinking if I was to teach them about stuff they're interested in right now, it would probably be Power Rangers, kickboxing and football. Like, I wonder what stocks I'd pick out for that.
Well, a lot of these big oil companies own the European soccer teams, so you might have some luck yet.
There might be some ethical conflicts there too.
Yeah, there might be.
So, how do we behave about money? Because I think thinking about back to what we learned growing up around money, how do we behave with money as humans? What's our natural kind of behaviors?
Well, the short answer is poorly. There's I like to say, and it's true that God could not have designed a worse investor than you or I. Basically, I mean every impulse we have, and I write about this in my new book, The Behavioural Investor. But everything from the way that our brains are wired to the way that our society functions, to the way that our bodies work. I mean, everything in our environment sort of conspires to make us bad investors. And that can be a little disheartening. But once you understand some of these things, I think you're well prepared to guard against some of these errors. But I mean, the short answer has to be we're woeful investors, and if left to our own devices.
And is there any gender difference there between how women behave around money compared to how men behave with money?
Yeah, happily, women are much better with money than men are. That's not just me speaking to your audience. That is absolutely the case. So, women are less ego-driven, which is probably no surprise to anyone listening to this. So, women are less overconfident than men. Women are less likely to make sort of broad, sweeping changes and liquidate everything or go very risky or very conservative. They're sort of more even, stay the course. Women are better at weighting probability than men, and women are less sort of hormonally challenged than men are too. And I know that's sort of the opposite, I think, of how it's portrayed in popular culture. But men have 10 times the testosterone of women, and there's been interesting studies done on how testosterone and winning actually makes you stupid. Basically, if you're on a winning streak, if your stocks are doing well, your testosterone increases, and then it increases till such a point as you begin to become too aggressive or overconfident, and then can make a mistake, which sends you spiraling back the other way. And so, I mean, in every way, every study suggests that women are better investors than men.
That's really interesting. I wonder whether there's any research, and maybe this is a bit silly to even suggest this, but whether there's any research in and around a woman's cycle, whether there are particular times of the month where we may be more confident and better to make decisions around money than other times of the month, because obviously we get different levels of hormones. You're talking about hormones there. I wonder if there's any research into that. That would be quite interesting.
So none that I'm aware of, but I don't think it's a silly question because, one of the things that I write about in my book is just things about things like hunger. Things like hunger greatly impact the way that you make decisions around money. Even show some research in my book that talks about how the ancient hunter-gatherer cycle about being more conservative at different times of the year and more aggressive at different seasons of the year sort of factors into the way that we make decisions now. So yeah, we're profoundly influenced by bodily cues, like everything from hormonal cues to hunger cues, to sleep, definitely sleep, and caffeine, and, anything you can think of. So it makes absolute sense to me that a woman's cycle would have some sort of impact.
So is there like a prime time of when you should make financial decisions, like during your day, or when you're fueled, when you've got a full tummy and you've just had a coffee, or like, is there any particular prime time?
Well, so I think, two things. I think, first of all, one of the biggest findings of behavioral finance is that you want to minimize the decisions you have to make. Like, to the extent possible, you want to automate them. And so, for me, every 2 weeks, money comes out of my checking account and goes into my retirement account, whether or not my stomach's full, just automate it. Don't leave it to the whims of chance or the whims of, your hunger or satiety or hormonal levels that day. Just automate it is one of the most powerful things you can do. But then, beyond that, the big rule is just to avoid extremes. There's an acronym I learned when I was doing work with 12-step programs, with addiction recovery programs, and it's HALT, and it stands for hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. And the thought is you should never make a decision when you are any of those things, right? When you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, it's not a good time to be making life-changing decisions. And, the same can be said of money, and, substitute your emotion of choice. If you're feeling at an emotional extreme, whether it be greed, fear, or anything in between, probably a good time to sit that one out.
I love that. Yeah. So that was hunger. What was the acronym again?
HALT. Yeah. So
hunger,
HALT, like
angry.
Anger, yeah. Hungry, angry, lonely, or tired.
And tired. Okay. I guess that's a general rule you could apply to a lot of things rather than just money. You could just, like, you should never go food shopping when you're hungry, right? That's the worst thing to do. Or when you're tired. Or if you're feeling angry because you just end up ramming your shopping trolley into someone's ankles, So yeah, I love that. That's great. I've not heard of that before.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's exactly right.
And in terms of those are maybe some of the emotions, sort of anger and tired and lonely and things like that. So how do emotions influence how we make financial decisions?
Well, they influence us greatly. And, one of the reasons why is that we confuse the emotional state we're in with the desirability of an investment. So, to put this more concretely, people who are happy tend to underrate risk. People who are in a good mood tend to see sunshine on the horizon. People who are in a bad mood tend to see risk everywhere. So we always see the world through the lens of whatever emotion we're experiencing. And so, sometimes that's why you just need to avoid these emotional extremes. I mean, there are plenty of times in a given week when we're always feeling emotion. I mean, that's never going to go away. But we're not always at emotional extremes. So whatever emotional state you're in, you're going to see the world of investing in money through the lens of whatever emotion you're experiencing at that moment. And interestingly, I cite research in the book that shows that some of the best investors in the world are people who have had traumatic brain injuries and have damaged the emotional processing centers of their brain. So they're not able to experience strong emotion or any emotion. And they're great gamblers and they're great investors, but they have trouble, picking out what kind of ice cream they want and, what kind of suit to wear, because emotions impact every decision that we make, whether we know it or not, even silly decisions about, what flavor of ice cream to have. And so emotion's always going to be there, but we can do our best to stay out of making big decisions when we're emotionally volatile.
That's really interesting. One of the things that I'm very passionate about talking about internally within the financial services profession is about how, often as financial advisors, we suffer with this curse of knowledge, and we have so much knowledge around financial jargon that we forget that to the layman person on the street, that even the word SIP or pension can be quite daunting for a lot of people because there's an emotional connection, and often we can anchor that to something, right? So I know that in behavioural finance, anchoring is one of those beliefs and behaviors that we have, because maybe someone said to us 10 years ago that pensions are really bad, and you've read something in the newspaper that says pensions, have just hit rock bottom or something like that. And then you anchor that decision and that emotion to something that you have heard. And one of the things that I'm really passionate about talking about in the industry is that how much jargon we use, and then that can put people off investing, and that can drive this kind of fear around just even talking about money. Like, do you see that in the work that you do and the work that you've written about as a behavioral finance expert?
Yeah, you're spot on. I think, jargon is one of the ways that across professions that professionals justify their fees. And so, if we know all these big fancy words, we can, bring you into our office and wow you with our acumen, and then, charge you hit you with a big bill. But I think the best financial professionals in the world are demystifying the world of investing, trying to cut through that jargon and make this as simple as possible. Because this is something that I think no one believes when I tell them this, but financial planning and investing are quite simple. Like the nuts and bolts of what you ought to be doing, it's really, really quite simple. Save a little bit every week, spread it around, leave it alone. I mean, is a pretty good start to get started with investing. And everyone wants to make it more complex than it is. And so I think we absolutely, as an industry, need to cut through this jargon and empower people. Empower people to know that it's not as hard as they think, but it is behaviorally hard. Like it's psychologically hard to do the right thing. Just the same way that maintaining a proper weight is really all about diet and exercise. I mean, that's all you need, in one sense, is to eat the right things and maintain the right level of activity. But it's far easier said than done. So the same applies in our world. Yeah,
completely. I talk about this quite a lot because I've been in financial services now for about 20 years. But actually, when I was growing up in financial services, so I joined a bank when I was 18, came out of college, went straight into finance. So going through my 20s, you would think that I should have been good with money because I was learning about this stuff, but actually I wasn't, because I had such an emotional connection with money. So for me, as soon as I earned my salary, I would go and spend it. Literally all of it. I would spend all of it. Some of it I'd already pre-spent in my head. I knew what I was going to buy before I'd even received it. And for me, the emotional connection was because I felt really bad about myself, and I had really low self-esteem and body confidence issues, which stem right back through my teenage years. That when I earned money, my kind of thought process was, right, I've earned this money, I'll spend it on clothes, then I'll feel skinny, then I'll feel better about my body confidence. And I just ended up in this cycle because it didn't improve my confidence for obvious reasons. And I was already skinny, so it wasn't helping me with that. And so I kind of got into this circle of control. And my emotions were just driving my behaviors. And it wasn't really until I tackled the underlying emotion that it completely transformed my entire relationship with money. Obviously it moved me out of debt and into being able to save and invest. And that's why I think I feel so passionate about it, because I've been through that. So I understand what it's like to feel like you're in this constant cycle of, well, I'm not able to save or invest because I'm just spending all my money. Like, do you see that in the work that you've done? I mean, you must have done, I guess, as a psychologist to see how, maybe childhood traumas or aspects of bullying and eating disorders and those sorts of things can have an impact on how we behave with money.
Well, you mentioned earlier how much more likely we are to talk about other taboos like sex or religion than we are about money, and that's the case. And I've been doing some work in the last year around couples and money and helping couples become more explicit in sort of outlining their values and their preferences around money. But what I found is that in the US, 12% of couples, like married couples, have never had a conversation about money. And it's like 40% have never talked about money before they get married.
Wow.
Right. And so it's incredible, right? I mean, it's incredible to think. I don't even know how you could get through a month or a week without talking to your spouse about money. But, that's shocked me. But yes, like this is absolutely taboo. And we see that because people haven't been explicit about these things, because they haven't talked about them or outlined them, they can kind of operate in the background. Like you talked about, spending money to try and be happy, to feel skinny, to feel better about your body, whatever it was. But that's kind of operating in the background. And it's only with the benefit of 2020 hindsight that you're able to look at that and say, well, this is what was going on. So we need to become way more concrete about the ways that we talk about our money values. We need to become way more comfortable about this. And, I think with respect to your audience in particular, women are socialized to not care about money in the same way that men are. I mean, women are discouraged from talking about money, I think, relative to men. And so I think that the added benefit to the folks that are listening to this is double that of what it is to a man, just because of the way that women are sort of discouraged from talking about or thinking about money, or talking about or thinking about being powerful.
Yeah. And so how should we be acknowledging that? I mean, and like you say, hindsight is a great thing. I can sit here now, I'm in my late 30s, and I can look back and think, right, if I'd have done this differently, I perhaps would have, been in a position that I am now earlier. But if someone's feeling like that, and often I get people contacting me saying, I feel exactly like that. Like I'm just spending. I know I should be saving, but I just cannot get control of my financial habits. And it is that emotion that's driving that. How does somebody even begin to kind of uncover and unravel maybe how they're feeling about money?
Yeah, well, I think we need educators like you, because money has become sort of this proxy for liquid happiness, right? Like we can't measure things like well-being or happiness very concretely. And so money is kind of an easy shorthand for that. And so we assume that, like, if we're rich, or if we're spending a lot, or if we have a well-packed closet, that we'll be happy. And yet all of the research shows that money cannot buy you happiness after you sort of have your basics covered, up to the point where you need shelter and food and a safe place to live. Like money absolutely does buy you happiness relative to those who don't have enough money for those things. But once you get your bases covered, it doesn't help. And we need to be telling that story, and we need educators like you and me out there talking to the world about what money does and doesn't do, because it doesn't buy happiness. It buys the absence of sadness, or the absence of worry, but it doesn't buy meaning or fulfillment or happiness. And I think when people can disabuse themselves of this notion, I think they make better choices with their money. Yeah,
I love the way you describe that, like buying the absence of sadness. And I think sometimes, it is about identifying maybe what is making you sad about things, because like for me, once I understood that my sadness was being caused by my lack of body confidence, then I know by working on my body confidence, then that would make me happy. And then that would create me, would get me into a different cycle of how I dealt with money. So yeah, I really like that, buying the absence of sadness. That's great.
Well, and the body confidence one is a great one. An interest in eating disorders is what got me into the business in the first place. And so this is sort of a passion area of mine. But, you might think on the surface, my problem is around money, and you dig a little deeper and you go, you know what, this is really about me spending money because I lack body confidence. And then you dig a little deeper and you go, well, I lack body confidence because of, a ABC thing. And so I think we need to always be digging and always be trying to understand ourselves at a deeper level. Because there's money it's an easy, socially acceptable thing to be kind of silly with money. And so we can stop there, but it might be masking bigger psychological problems, and we need to have the courage to keep digging.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I love about, like, in this country last week we had Mental Health Awareness Week. So there was loads of people, high profile bloggers and experts kind of sharing their own personal stories around money, and it was really nice to see, because even the royals were sharing about how when Prince William and Prince Harry lost their mother and the impact that had on their behaviours and their emotions and how that impacted their mental health. I think that it's really important to talk about these things, because it is, I don't think it's almost not as taboo as talking about money. Sometimes we're quite open now, particularly nowadays, talking about mental health, but we're still not particularly open about talking about money and problems that we've had with money. But I think the two are so connected, right? If we have mental health or psychological issues, then it's going to impact the way that we feel about life and the way that we respond and behave. And so I just think it's incredibly important to talk about all of these things.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I've been pleasantly surprised at the ways in which mental illness has been destigmatized in just even the 10 or 12 years that I've been working. I think it's a wonderful development. But, with respect to money, I mean, think about this, if you don't have much money, that's looked down on societally. And I think societally, the message is, work harder, do better, if you don't have much money. But then if you have lots of money, I think the societal message is like, yuck, eat the rich, like you leech, you haven't done enough, like you got this on the backs of other people. And then if you're average, nobody wants to be average. Like I found out early on when I was giving IQ tests that nobody wants to be average. You can tell someone, they have a learning deficit and they go, okay, like we'll figure out how to work around this. And you tell someone they're very smart and they go, okay, great. But you tell someone they're average and they're very upset. So there's really no good place to be with money. I think you don't want to be. The poor are looked down upon societally. The rich are looked down upon societally, and no one wants to be average. So I think it's a really hard spot we find ourselves with respect to money.
Yeah, and what that you were just talking about there about, like, one of the things they taught growing up is to work hard. And yet we read things like, that we should work smarter, not harder. And that, so subconsciously, I guess we're thinking, well, but my dad or my mum always told me to work hard. And so to earn more money, I have to work harder. And, I see this all the time with women in businesses, that they feel like they have to put more hours into their business to earn more money. And it's this, this subconsciousness, the message that we hear about working harder rather than smarter. It's quite fascinating, isn't it, how these different statements that maybe we grew up around have an impact on how we feel about wealth and how we feel about money. And just that word wealth, people think the word wealth is not a great word, because I think that maybe wealthy people are greedy. And
right. Well, and I think we've confused, wealth and hard work in a very profound way, because I mean, there are plenty of people working very, very hard and just barely getting by. And so, yeah, but that's not the way that society views it, right? They view it as sort of a badge of honor. So yeah, I think we need to decouple some of these things. And, you see a lot of this sort of hustle harder, in entrepreneurial circles, wake up at 4:00. And, if you're not waking up at 4:00 and drinking your green smoothie and doing a 2-hour workout before you go to the office, then, you're not doing it right. And so, I think there's a lot of bad messages out there, and that can leave us open to burnout and other sorts of negative psychological fallout.
Yeah, I see that a lot in my space. So a lot of the work that I do is online, and you get a lot of online, very wealthy entrepreneurs that teach, or that kind of come out with these messages about, grow your audience to 50,000 in 7 days, or be earning £10,000 passive income per month, and it sends out, I believe, the wrong messages to women about being successful in their businesses. It really gripes me, actually, particularly when, you see these headlines like that, because it puts a lot of pressure on women. They think, well, if I'm not earning 10 grand every month in my business, then I'm not successful.
What's wrong with me, kind of?
Yeah, what's wrong with me just earning $2,000 a month in my business, or building my audience slowly, and building an engaged audience rather than just going for numbers, right?
Yeah, the first book I ever wrote was called Personal Benchmark, and it's a pretty hard read, candidly, but it's pretty technical, but the overarching point was sort of run your own race, figure out your measure of success and run relative to that, because there are a lot of really impersonal, damaging messages out there. We have to become informed consumers of content in a world where we see whatever it is, 5,000 ads a day. And, I think we need to be informed consumers of content, because everyone has an angle. All of these people that you're talking about have an angle, and their angle is not your wellness or mental health. And so I think, one of the things when I was working in an eating disorder treatment center, one of the things that we taught the women to do was become critical consumers of beauty messages. When you see the cover of Vogue or, whatever, you go, you gain an understanding of what went into this, the airbrushing, the contouring. And so then you can critically examine the messages that are being sent to you. And I think the same rules apply in financial wellness. You need to understand that the messages that you're getting are not there to make you happy or even wealthy, and they're someone else selling something, and you need to understand that and take them for what they're worth.
Yeah, and actually, I was talking about this at a conference I went to last week. We were talking about exactly that, the images that are on the front of magazines. I mean, I'm kind of quite lucky in a way. I'm quite fortunate that I don't have girls, because this has been one of the things that's always really frightened me is the messages that's leaving to our kids. And I know it can have a similar impact on boys as it can with girls, but I think just with my experience of growing up around, in my days when I was growing up, it was all magazines, it wasn't social media, but the impact that social media has, and I know we're going slightly off topic, but I think it's really interesting about, that there are the messages that we receive, whether it's about body confidence or it's about money or it's about wealth or being successful, and it's about what we can control. And that's one of the things that I love about your Laws of Wealth book, is that rule number one, I think you talk about, I think it's rule number one, you talk about you control what matters most. And then that's, I guess, what we're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I was very intentional when I laid out the rules in the Laws of Wealth, and I sequenced them in a meaningful way. And I wanted investors to understand, you control what matters most. And that's a layered conversation, because part of what that means is your behavior is the best predictor of whether or not you reach your financial goals, right? Like, what the stock market does, what the prime minister does, what the president does, that is less consequential to you crossing the finish line than you engaging in a handful of smart behaviors, like staying the course, saving regularly, investing in yourself so that you can progress and get raises. Those things are what matters most. But it also refers to the very thing that you're talking about today, which is being intentional about the messages that you take in, the kind of people you surround yourself, whether it's health and wellness or wealth messages. The kind of things you're feeding your brain have a great deal to do with how content you feel. And, everything from the kind of neighborhood that you choose to live in to who you follow on Instagram is going to have a great deal to do with how happy you are. And I don't think we always take ownership of that. I think we can be too passive and let the world happen to us sometimes, rather than trying to curate the messages we're putting in our head.
Yeah, I love that. And maybe let's talk about one of your other rules. So rule number 2 is that you cannot do this alone. So talking about like the messages that you're hearing and how your behaviors impact on how you influence and achieve your goals. Why is it important, looking under rule number 2, that we maybe don't do this alone?
So you cannot do this alone was my sort of nod to the need to work with a financial professional, but not for the reason that you think. All of the research shows that when most people engage a financial professional, they go, well, I'm going to hire her because she's going to help me get eye-popping returns. She's going to put me in the hottest stocks, and that's going to be what decides my financial success. When the research shows two things. The research shows that people who work with financial professionals do much better than those who don't, about 3% a year better, which is huge when you can expect, 7 to 8% a year in returns over long periods of time. An extra 3% is a big deal. And the second piece of the research shows, though, that it's not because these financial professionals are picking great stocks. It's because they're keeping you from being your own worst enemy. At a handful of times when you want to sabotage your well-being, when you want to sell out or go to cash or, do whatever, or invest in some highly speculative, dumb something or other. They keep you from being your own worst enemy. And that's the reason why. And so research out of Canada shows that people who have a long-term relationship with a financial professional have over 2.5 times as much wealth as their peers that are the same age who have gone it alone. But again, it's not because you're working with, the Warren Buffett of your area. It's because they have kept you from making mistakes. And so that's sort of, that's sort of the twist. You need to work with a professional, but not for the reason that you thought.
Yeah, that's incredible. I have heard this research before about the kind of 3% more returns a year by working with a financial professional. But I think it's really important because I think in the UK particularly, we still have a proportion of financial professionals that are more focused on products rather than the behavioural aspect of finances or the planning aspect of finances. And I'm hugely passionate about this. I talk about this a lot in my speaker events that I do within the financial services profession, because, if we focus our relationship with a client on their behaviours, as you've just explained, that's where we can add value, I believe, keeping you on track, nudging you in the right direction, all of those things. Because none of us can time the market. None of us know what stocks are going to outperform other stocks. We can have a bit of a guesstimate around that, but none of us can really guess that for certain. So the only certainty we can provide is by keeping you on path, making sure that you hit all your financial goals and that you reach where you want to be maybe a little bit earlier than you anticipated. And that's where I see the real value of financial planning, certainly in this country, and financial coaching is around keeping clients, exactly what you just described, Daniel. But we've got a little way to go, I think, in this country in terms of getting all financial professionals to think in that way.
Well, and in this country. So I love your example there. I'm going to give an example of why what you just said is so powerful. So there's a study I cite in the book. So first of all, you're absolutely right. No one knows the end from the beginning. No one can, perfectly choose what the next hot stock is going to be. But let's just suppose for a minute that you could. Let's just suppose for a minute that this is a skill you had, and that in the year 2000, you're going to put your clients in the best performing mutual fund of the 2000s. Mm-hmm. So from 2000 to 2010, the best performing mutual fund got 18.5% per year, which is like absolutely incredible. I mean, you're like doubling your money every 3 years. So it's absolutely incredible performance. Let's just pretend that you could have known that from the outset, and you put your clients in this. The average client return in that mutual fund was negative 11%, because what clients do is it shoots up, everybody hears about it and they jump in, right? Everybody gets excited about it, they jump in. It has a period of bad performance, just like everything does. Like it goes down for a bit. Everyone goes, oh, that was a mistake. It wasn't so hot after all. They jump out. Yeah. It goes back up again. Everyone jumps in, rinse and repeat. And so even if you could know the end from the beginning, even if you could understand, day one, this is going to be the best performing mutual fund, your ability to capitalize on that is still impacted by your ability to behave correctly, to take the ride. And so the work of a financial professional to keep their clients in their seat is absolutely the most powerful thing you can do. Wow.
It's that kind of that sort of herd mentality, isn't it? What is it Warren Buffett said? He says, be fearful when others are greedy and be greedy when others are fearful. Is that right? Have I got that right?
That's right. You got it.
I guess that's true, isn't it? And for women, though, we are statistically better than our male counterparties, because we're not as driven by greed as much as men, because men tend to be, and I hate even saying this because it feels like really biased towards men, and I'm not like one of these, waving my bra in the air for like female feminists or anything like that. But I do think that as women, we're less likely to respond to making changes on our portfolios once we are invested, but it's getting invested in the first place. I think that's a difficulty.
Yeah, it's interesting. So we've talked. I've said lots of nice things about women as investors. The thing that women need to be careful about, there's a couple of things. So one thing is the gender pay gap. So there are structural reasons, systematic societal reasons dealing with inequality that we as a society need to root out. But there's also the issue of women not asking for raises and not applying for that next big job. The studies have shown that men will go out for a promotion when they meet 50% of the qualifications, right? If we have, this list of, you need to be able to do these 10 things to get this job, a man will go, I can do 5 of those. That's good enough. And women will wait till they tick every box, right? And so, men tend to make more than women for a couple of reasons. One is reasons of societal injustice that we need to be striving to do away with. But the other is because just men go for it more. And so women need to be, going for these big jobs, asking to get paid what they deserve to be paid. And then the other thing that women need to consider is that they live longer. Men do more stupid things than women, and so have a nasty habit of dying about 10 years, because they drive faster and they eat worse and they do all kinds of things, take bigger risks. And so, women tend to live much longer than men, and that requires you to take more investment risk, to plan for a longer future. And so there really are some very particular considerations when it comes to women and wealth.
And no, don't do it when you're hungry or when you're angry or tired. It's completely fascinating, isn't it? And I think you're right. It is just, and that's why I run this podcast, because I want to just give women more confidence in their ability to make their decisions. Because, we're not stupid. It's just that we're not taught this stuff. We're not taught this stuff at school. We're typically not taught this stuff from our parents. I know the childhood that you had talking about money was probably much rarer than I would say for the average person. Most people's parents didn't talk about money. I think with anything, it's just having the confidence to think and behave differently around money. So thank you so much for sharing some really fascinating insights around that. Just to kind of finish off on this subject then, Daniel. So talking about like technology and automating habits and things like that, like, do you use any technology particularly in your life? Like, do you have any favorite money apps or anything that you use?
Okay, so I'm going to be your worst guest ever. So one of the things that my research has found is that the more you look at your portfolio, the worse you tend to do. And so I have the most lo-fi, low-tech investing setup. It's swept out of my account. It goes, it goes to my investment account. And I tell you, I don't even have a login for my investment account because I don't want to look at it. And when my statements come, I tear them up. So the answer is no, I don't have a favorite app, but I'm very principled. I'm a principled Luddite. I'm a principled low-tech person.
What about your kids? Do they use any particular apps to do with money? I guess
so. Yes. So they do. My daughter has, this is terrible. People are going to run me out of town. My daughter has a Robinhood account, right? My daughter has one of these free Robinhood accounts where she holds her Disney stock. So that's what she has.
Is that an American? I've not heard of that one before.
It is. Yeah. Check it out. I don't know if it's available internationally, but they've it's free trading. So it's free trading. And again, it's one of those things where the fact that it's free leads people to make a host of really dumb mistakes. Because, with E-Trade or one of those, you have to pay whatever, $5 or $6 to make a trade. But when it's free, you can trade all you want. And, of course, the research shows the more you trade, the worse you do. so
counterintuitive.
Sounds good. Yeah. Well, it sounds good on paper to have a free trading account, but I think it's actually inducing people to make some pretty dumb choices. But my daughter is a buy and hold Disney investor. So that's through her Robinhood account.
I love that. That's fantastic. What about like favorite Netflix show or TED Talk show at the moment that you've been watching or you've got into?
Okay, so my favorite show right now is Billions
Yes.
Is it on HBO or Showtime? That's embarrassing. I have both and I can't remember, but Showtime, I believe. So Billions is an absolutely riveting look at the fictional life of a hedge fund manager. So, not very true to life, but a good fun.
But yeah, I'm glad you said that. My husband's watching it, so it's always on in the background when I'm generally working in the evenings. But yeah, he loves Billions. I would say it's definitely not the reality.
No.
Sensationalized completely, isn't it? But a good one to watch.
Well, and one of the main characters is a psychologist named Wendy Rhodes who's working with the traders to make better decisions around their investing. So I mean that's catnip for me, of course.
That's you written all over it then, right?
Yeah.
Fabulous. And what about so one of the things I always ask my podcast guests is for your book recommendations. So are there any particular books that have either impacted your life personally or maybe have impacted on how you've gone off to then write your own books?
Yeah, so my all-time favorite book is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I just think it's the very best look at how you live a life of meaning and purpose. That's one that I revisit periodically. So, one book recommendation would be Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. The best book I read last year was actually a book called The Geometry of Wealth by Dr. Brian Portnoy. And he talks about meaning and purpose as it relates to the world of finance. So if you're looking for a good book on sort of money and meaning and happiness, The Geometry of Wealth by Brian Portnoy is excellent.
Oh, great. Fabulous. Two great recommendations there. I'll pop some links to those in the show notes and also on the blog, as well, obviously, as your own books as well, Daniel. So you've got The Laws of Wealth, that book was named the best investment book of 2017 by the Business Book Awards. And then you also have your newest book. So your first book was Personal Benchmark. Is that right?
Yeah, I've written a lot. So yeah, there's Personal Benchmark, then The Laws of Wealth, and then the newest one is called Behavioural Investor.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. Great. So I'll pop a link to all of those as well in the show notes for people to have a look at. So thank you so much for joining us today, Daniel. It's been a pleasure interviewing you, and I often enjoyed some of that sunshine.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Daniel. So thank you so much for listening. And as always, if you've enjoyed listening to this podcast today, I would really appreciate a 5-star review on either Apple iTunes or Spotify or whatever platform you're using to listen to this. I really appreciate it because the more reviews I can get, the more rankings that builds me in the world of podcasting, the more people will be able to listen to these teachings, and the more people I can then influence and help to think and behave differently around money and to be financially resilient at whatever stage of your life that you're at, stand on your own 2 feet. I'm very, very passionate about that. So please do leave a review on the podcast. I will pop a link in the show notes and also in the blog of all of the things that we talked about today with Daniel, including his book links, and also some of the references that we talked about in today's episode. So thank you so much for listening as always, and I look forward to catching you again on the podcast next Monday. Take care.